All right, and we are recording. All right, Mr. Boobles, kick us off, man.
All right, so this week on the podcast, we've got Darrell Rigby here. Darrell, you're an author of Doing Agile, right? Multiple HBR articles, lots of other publications. You're a managing partner at Bain and Company. But tell me, give maybe our listeners a little more background on your about you and where you come from and how you've been involved in the Agile community.
It's great to be with you. Thank you. I was raised in Southern California. I came back to the East Coast to go to business school, ended up staying here. I've been at Bain for 43 years now. So I am a dinosaur, and my primary role is probably historian at this point. But I came across Agile when I led Bain's global retail practice for 26 years. And when I was doing that, we started working on what I called omnichannel retailing, which is how do you get the best of both physical and digital retailing? And when I was doing that, I had to start working with the IT departments of a number of major retailers. And I will say, I am not a technologist. Unlike the two of you, I, I am not a technologist. The last coding I did was in COBOL and Fortran. It turns out there's not a lot of demand for that these days. But one of the things that was interesting was as I was working with these technology departments, they were speaking a whole different language and Scrum and backlogs and stand ups. And to me, it made no sense. And so for a long time, I just relied on Bain's technology experts to translate this for me. And then eventually I said, this is crazy because the people that are talking this language, they are so much better at omni-channel retailing. I want to figure out how this works. So I started sitting in on some of the meetings, and it was fascinating. They were working effectively together. It felt far more humane. It felt like a more natural way of collaborating with each other. And so I took training courses and I read books. And eventually I concluded maybe 12 years ago, this is not a way of developing software. This is a better way of working. This is a better way, particularly, of doing innovation. I'll bet it works in a whole lot of places as well as it does in software. And that turned out to be true, marketing and all kinds of new product development. So I just fell in love with it. And as I was teaching it to clients, it was fascinating to hear people clustering together and saying, I got to tell you, I ain't never going back to the old way of working. This is so much better. If they force me to go back to do that, I'll leave. I'll go find a better way to do work. So,
It's interesting that you say that because I often ask like teams that I'm working with, like after the fact, like, like how much would I have to pay you more a year to go back to the old way? And the number is surprising. Like it's sometimes tens of thousands of dollars that people are talking about that I would, or like, I just wouldn't do it. Like there's no amount of money that you pay me or, my happiness is worth more than that. So that's cool that you're seeing the same thing across different organizations because I think that's a common theme. Like, it just is a better way of working. It's more humane. It just allows people to be successful, and that's a great story.
I had a funny conversation probably 4 or 5 years ago with a fellow at Saab Aeronautics, and they use Agile to develop their fighter jets. And it's a remarkably interesting process because they got 100 teams working on this Gripen fighter jet. And so I was interviewing him, and at the end of it, he said, "Can I ask you a question?" And I said, "Sure." And he said, "You seem so fascinated in the fact that we've got 100 teams working on this. But my question is, doesn't everybody work like this?" Well, no, it turns out they don't. What you're doing is a little bit unique, but people who do this for a while, they just can't imagine doing it any other way.
Yeah, I know in your book you talk a lot about like operational teams, and maybe they're not the right fit always to be using different agile frameworks or things like that. So when you talk to like Saab or other large organizations that are doing this, how do they distinguish, between what teams are going to be agile and which teams might maybe just have more of an agile mindset to their approach to work?
Well, so we believe that in order to run an organization in an agile way, so that it's actually an agile business, an agile organization, that you have to do three things well. You have to run the business efficiently. Let's call that operations. You have to change the business effectively, at least as fast as the market and your customers and competitors are changing. And then you have to figure out how to harmonize those two activities so that they work well together. And the point that we're trying to make is you don't necessarily need your tax and treasury department to be divided up into agile teams and running daily stand-ups and 2-week sprints and things like that. During normal times, I do a lot of traveling, and when I get onto a plane, I want to hear the pilot say, we're just topping off the fuel and we're going through all of our checks to make sure that the mechanics are all in good situations. I do not want to hear a pilot come on and say, hey, folks, going to try something new today. How about an agile takeoff? We've never done this. I have no idea how much fuel is in the tank. We're going to trust that the mechanics did their job. I'm not listening to any air traffic controller, some bureaucrat in an ivory tower over there telling me what to do. We're going straight to the front of the line. We're going to take off like a rocket. This should be exciting. And if it doesn't work, well, we'll do something different the next time around. So the point is there are parts of the company that need standard operating procedures that like checklists. And all of those people should be looking for opportunities to improve. And so we want that frontline engagement, but we want them following those standard operating procedures until an agile team finds a better way to do things and then builds them into those operations. So we're not saying operations are just static forever. It's just that it's a little different doing day-to-day procedures where you're trying to make sure that the food isn't contaminated or that we're following all the regulatory advice to do this right, than somebody who is intentionally injecting variability into the process, experimentation, which by its nature is risky, and saying we're going to try this, but we're going to contain the experiment, and the parts that don't work, we're going to stop those quickly, and the parts that do work, we're going to triple, quadruple the speed, and we'll get excited about this.
So
Yeah. Go ahead, Jeff.
I was just going to quick add on to that because, so again, referencing the book there, I literally have it right here. So all my notes are, I can just pull them up. But it's if I recall correctly, it was something like 10 to 50% of an organization is typically the recommendation to be having the agile teams, the agile approach to things. And even in that example that you just gave, it's more of the operations side that we don't necessarily need to worry about shaking things up quite so much. Is it really focused on just operations or the complexity of the work that those areas in an organization are doing? Or was there something else inside of that really influences that number other than just saying, kind of general operations work?
Yeah. So I think that the amount and even the way that businesses do agile will vary by industry. It will vary by company and whether the strategy is one of we're going to be an innovation leader or we're just going to be a low cost, efficient provider. I think it varies by department within inside a company. And I think it varies by activity, even within a department. So it's the reason I say I don't think there's a standard number. I know that at places like Spotify, half of the people are working in engineering and development. And so half of the people are using a lot of Agile. But not everyone in Spotify is organized that way. And in a lot of industrial companies that we work with, we do find that typically maybe 10 to 20% of the people are working on agile teams. Some of those are persistent teams that'll stay together for 3-4 years. Some of them are temporary teams that'll come together for 3 or 4 months to solve a problem, like what should our financial reports look like, or how can we change our human resource hiring policies. Uh, but it depends on the specific activity. I think Agile is a tool for helping companies and people to be happier and deliver better results. And like any tool, you have to pick the right tool for the right job. So a chainsaw is a great tool. I don't use it for slicing tomatoes. Surgeons don't use it for heart surgery. They're great tools, and Agile is a great tool for doing innovation in particular. But I define innovation fairly broadly. Yes, it's new products and services, but it's also better ways of doing business processes. And it's a better way of doing technologies that enable those business processes, that enable those products and services.
Yeah, one of the questions I often ask organizations is like, what do you want to optimize for? And so,
Right.
if the goal is like being responsive to change and high value work, great. And for the whole system, then that's something we can use Agile for. If the goal is security, maybe we're a government organization, or maybe it's I don't know, maybe it's really predictable and we just need really high quality, like it's accounting practices, maybe, and it's just like standard things we have to do every single, quarter and month and things like that, then maybe we don't need that, right? Like those are, but how does that influence the teams that are optimizing for something different? And then we should look at like where that independencies are. Like back to your point of like the three things that you're looking at is like, how do you marry those two things up together? Is always, there's going to be a tension there, and that tension's okay, but we need to find a way to like deal with it productively.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. I have a son-in-law who is very entrepreneurial, has started a lot of small businesses. And there are times when he knows exactly what he wants a group in his organization to do. And he'll say, I get so frustrated because we've got these agile nut jobs who, before they'll do anything, will say, well, let's make sure we've got all the customer research on this, and they'll do all sorts of background on the discovery. No, I know what I want them to do. Please just do it. And there are cases where, when you know exactly what you want to accomplish and how you want to accomplish it, traditional ways of working are quite good at getting that done. It's where you don't know what you're trying to do exactly. You don't know how you want to get it done. They're vague, they're unpredictable, they're going to require some greater creativity. That's where it can work, but you can frustrate a lot of people if you spend a lot of time trying to reinvent what the specification should look like. If somebody already knows, no, I know what they should look like, let's just do it.
Yeah, I like.
Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
I was gonna say I really like the question in your book about like just ask that question, like how could we validate this, or what quick experiment could we run to ensure that we are going in the right direction. Back to kind of that same point where a lot of times we think we know the answer, but like we could have did something really really simple to validate that answer that would have cost minor amounts of money compared to what we're spending. And so it's like risk versus reward. And so a lot of times I think there's a balance, but again, you don't want to be doing analysis for months and months and months and not learn anything. And so that's more of that traditional analysis mindset, where Agile is more about that feedback mindset of like, let's learn quickly and then we can adjust from there. So Jeff, what were you going to say?
I was just going to add on, I like what I'm hearing with, when the inputs are known and the outputs are known, Scrum is a waste of time. Agile is a waste of time, right? That's adding more variance to the system that you don't necessarily need, because all the variables are known. We're just trying to control the variables at that point. My one thought on that, though, was I feel like a human being has a natural tendency to oversimplify things. Like, oh, we know all of that stuff. We get it. And so I like that we're coming back to balance, and I'm totally on board with balance. It's just a slight cautionary tale that we just seem to oversimplify things. And even when there are some variables that are out there, we just kind of shrug those off and just say, no, we got our control mechanisms in place. And there's always the black swan event that's out there. There's always something that we don't account for. And I'm not saying, well, gee, that's the reason to go agile with everything. But I would just nudge people to think, well, there's absolutely something that we are not considering today. And is our system going to keep us safe against those black swan events? Or maybe does actually adding a little bit of disruption to our system actually make us more anti-fragile to be prepared for when these unknown and unexpected events like COVID-19 come through. And all of a sudden, we've built in a little bit of responsiveness into our system to be able to account for these unexpected events.
Yeah, I love that point, actually, because I think frequently about the Dunning-Kruger effect and how much we think we know things that we really don't know. And I think it's very typical of bureaucrats to believe, oh no, I already know the answer to this, when in fact they really don't. And one of the things I always loved about Thomas Edison is when he was trying to invent something, he would always look at the research, the existing research, at what had already been tried, but he often didn't believe it. And, a lot of research, if you look at a lot of studies, only a small part of that can recreate the original test results. And so Thomas Edison and I am often inclined to challenge some of the existing traditional wisdom and say, as you were saying earlier, Jeff, interesting idea. How could we test that? And I will admit that I've shocked some senior executives, some senior clients who say, well, this is the answer. Just go do it. And I'll stop it and say, that could very well be right. Now, how could we test it to make sure it is before we really start scaling? It's just such a harmless question.
Right.
Yeah, and I would say not just how can we test it, but what's a cheap and easy test to quickly
Right.
run in order to validate it, right? We don't need to run a 3-month experiment to validate some things. Let's just quick throw a video together or a paper prototype, or the sky's the limit with all of these types of tests that we can be running. But the point is to just validate very quickly and easily that we are in fact on the right course of action here.
And I'm sure you folks have seen this as well. People that get really good at Agile, the thing that I admire is they get really good at these prototypes. They get fast, they get inexpensive, they get very creative. And one of the things that we find is that the less polished the prototype, the better the feedback is that you get from customers when you're putting it in front of them, because they can see that it's in its rudimentary stages. And so they don't hold back and say, well, maybe you could do this with it, or I don't like how that works. Whereas if you're bringing something that is obviously quite polished and refined and you've been doing this for years, customers don't want to hurt your feeling. Oh, yeah, that looks nice. Yeah, you should be very proud of that. And so these fast prototypes, getting them out there, it's an art as much of a science. And I love watching Agile teams that get good at doing that.
Yeah, and you can do that all the time. So I've got some stories where I worked with some teams, and it's like, hey, as we build stuff out, let's just go on, we're doing 2-week sprints, day 8, let's just go to the customers and let's have them use our product. And they can tell, hey, it's not fully tested yet, it's not completely done, but let's run it through and see how they use it. And then let's make some tweaks before we actually say this thing is done and we deliver it, and potentially release it to more people. So yeah, I think that you can do it in the front end before you even start. You can do it in the middle when you're almost done, and you can do it at the end to validate that you actually worked. You can do it all the time. So it's back to balance. It's always doing a little bit of everything. I think that really is, a guiding principle when we're talking about doing things in an agile way.
So I'm sorry, Jeff. I feel like we're okay.
Go for it.
I wanted to, one of the many questions that I wanted to make sure that I threw out at you. So I think you did a really good job of in the book calling a spade with giving credit to Spotify for creating, a great way to work for Spotify, and calling out that this was never meant to be sold as a framework, never meant to be incorporated and copy and pasted into organizations. But with your experience working with so many large organizations, why don't they listen to that? Why? And I've cards on the table. I've never worked with anyone from Bain and Company. I've worked with a few other larger consulting groups, and one of them literally came in the door with the Spotify model ready to go, and that was the playbook that they sold to the organization, and the organization bought it. So I feel like part of this is on us as consultants. If this is the crap we're selling to an organization and they don't know any better, part of that's on us, but also part of it's on the organization to maybe do a little bit better fielding or understanding what's going on. But what's your take on it? Like, why is it so hard to get rid of the Spotify model?
Well, I think by nature, we as human beings don't like uncertainty. And so having someone come in with a prescription that says, look, this is fast, this is easy, this has proven effective at another organization that you admire, this is simple. Let's just go do it. It's already been done. It can happen so quickly. I do find it ironic that what they're trying to do is to create an agile organization in a very bureaucratic way.
Yeah.
It's we'll be agile after we get to this. And the biggest problem that I see is most often the senior executives don't really understand, let alone believe and practice agile. They just want this to be imposed on everybody else. Let's have you folks do agile, and then we as the senior leadership
Yep.
team,
Yep.
we'll just keep doing things pretty much the way we've always done things. And so they set up very heavy program management offices and they delegate, and it just doesn't work because what you're trying to do and how you're going to do it are vague and unpredictable. So I think, the reason we called the book Doing Agile Right is we just see so many people doing Agile wrong. We
Mm-hmm.
see, unfortunately, it like business process reengineering is turning into a bit of a euphemism for layoffs. We don't really want an agile organization. What we want is 30% less people.
Mm-hmm.
And so they come in and they set up these new organization structures, and everybody's built into squads and tribes and chapters and guilds, and everybody gets laid off, and they bring back 70% of the people, and they do psychological testing to see if they've got agile mindsets. And then half of the people end up in positions that they have no clue what they're doing, and the experts that are real subject matter experts are saying, I am out of here, I don't know what's. So they lose a lot of talent. They have a structure that looks like it should be agile, and yet somehow the results don't change. The people's mindsets, principles, values don't really change. It's a restructuring. And one of the most fascinating things to me about this terrible pandemic is I've had a lot of executives say, by that I mean 5 or 6 executives in the last month, say, during this pandemic, we have been forced to change. We have to prioritize things. We have to make decisions in a day that would have taken us months before. We need to give people more autonomy and reduce the layers of approval that we have. Now that I read your book, I realize that those are consistent with agile ways of working. Now, we haven't figured it out because in the process, we're burning people out. They're exhausted.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But still, what I want to do is to bottle this up and figure out how to take this sporadic sort of haphazard agile and make it more systematic, something that we can sustain
Mm-hmm.
into the future. And so I think a lot of people are figuring this out of necessity, but now they want to know, how do we really do this right? And two of the interesting lessons that they're learning is we're becoming more agile without restructuring the organization. We always thought that the major part of doing an agile transformation is that you had to reorganize everybody into all these tribes. The second thing that we're finding is we've got more agile talent inside our organization than we ever realized. We thought in order to do this, we were going to have to bring in a whole new group of people because our folks displaying no capability of innovating at all. Well, lo and behold, we've got some corporate MacGyvers buried all around this organization. We've just never given them the opportunity to do it. So I think it's easy to view a restructuring of the organization as the most important part of becoming agile. I don't think it's the right place to start, and I don't even think usually it's most of the reason that companies become truly agile.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to adding that entrepreneurial mindset throughout your organization. And generally that means that people are going to have an identity, right? Like that I have an identity if I'm a developer, as I'm a database administrator developer. Like I just work on databases. I could have that identity. I could have the same skills, or I could have the identity saying, no, I build digital lending products. And I'm responsible for like improving the amount of loans that we can accept, over a given month or something like that. And I'm part of that organization. That's a whole different conversation than saying I'm responsible making sure that we can execute these queries within some percentile or some performance variation or something like that. And I think that people are going to have an identity one way or another, and you can align them to different identities depending on how you run your organization. And so could it be structure? Maybe. Could it be other things? Probably. But I don't know. I think there's some guiding things that I don't know. There's like 5 guiding things that I keep going back to, and I would like to like get your opinions on these, Darrell. So I think if you favor self-selected teams and flexible teams over specialized and assigned teams, that's going to be a good thing. If you favor real teams over loosely aligned groups of individuals, that's going to be a great thing. If you favor transparency and of information and rapid information sharing over protected and slow information, that's going to be a good thing. And if you favor decisions made by the many over the few, that's going to be a great thing. And then the last one is conflict. And it's like favoring deliberate action over discouraging and avoiding conflict. So if you really cover those 5 things, I think it's going to guide you down a path of putting people in a position to make the decision at the time and place when they need to make it, and giving them all the information so they can do it, and then letting them make the best decision with the best information at the right time, right? Like it's better to make a decision today, right now, when I need to make it, than to wait for a bunch of levels of approval. And maybe it's slightly better decision, but it took 3 months to get there, And so what are your opinions on those like 5 things like that I kind of rattled off?
I love those. And maybe it's included in this. I love your first point because one of the things that I find is the thing you notice most in a really agile business is they are obsessed with creating happy customers. And so I loved the description you offered of my job is solving this customer problem, not building these features or functions. Because I really notice it. You can smell it when you get inside an organization. Everybody talks about, oh, we are a customer centric organization. And it's baloney at most places. We know that. But where it really takes hold and they feel like, yes, my job is to solve the customer problem. This first solution, it didn't work, but that's okay. I'm not giving up on solving this customer problem. I think that's obvious. And I also think that there has to be something in the organization about just respect for individuals and their inherent strengths, that there's something that's carried over from Taylorism, that the role of managers is to think, and the role of the rest of the people are to do what I tell them to do. There's a British film director that says a team effort is a bunch of people doing what I say. And I think there's something in an organization that the people actually do feel trusted and respected. And the job of leaders moves from predict, command, control to learn, adapt, unleash. Because what Bain's work finds is in those kinds of organizations, people are actually 40% more productive and happier than when they're just doing what their boss tells them to do. 40%. That means those organizations finish their work by 10 a.m. on Thursday. They can be going to the beach at the time that everybody else is working through end of the bell on Friday. And so I think taking care of customers, having fun in the organization, and respecting people. I couldn't agree more about letting people work where they have strengths. One of the great frustrations is people that feel like, I never get to work on the things that I love or doing well. We're so much more productive when we're doing that. Real teams, there's so much data that multitasking makes people stupid. It reduces our IQ, it frustrates us. And yet survey after survey where we do work at companies and say, how many different projects are you working on at a time? Then the median is 3. The median is 3. And we find a quarter of the people that are working on 5 or more at the same time. It's terrible. And transparency, I agree. There's a sense that if you're going to do anything innovative, well, you go behind locked doors and there's secret passwords to go in. And you folks know as well as I do, the best part of Agile is exposing it to everyone in the organization so that anyone who has an idea to help it can help it. Anyone who can benefit from it benefits. Or if we need to collaborate and coordinate timeframes, transparency is key. So I love all 5 of those things.
Yeah, I think one of the best alternatives to bureaucracy is transparency, right? Like, so we're talking expense policies. Why not just make that transparent and having a 3-phased approval process or something like that? Like if everybody on my team starts seeing that I'm going out for lobster dinners every time we travel, and they're going to Applebee's, like there's probably going to be some conflict there, right? Like we're going to have some conversations, and so I think that can just solve a lot of things. And then you context matters, and so there might be a case where, hey, I was taking out, a certain person, they love lobster. It actually ended up leading into a deal, and we made a lot of money out of this. So there was a good reason for it. Great. Context matters, and so it gives people flexibility, and not to say, oh, we can't do this because our policy says we can't, we need to get approval, so it allows people to make the right decision at the right time. I think if you just have transparency and then allowing them to make those decisions, when appropriate.
Yeah. So earlier you had made a comment, something that Jeff and I have experienced quite a bit as well. Agile is just for the teams. The rest of us up here, we'll just keep business as usual. And I think you made a nice distinction there, because I feel like this is the big nut to crack in the Agile community, which it's not just scaling; it's getting an Agile enterprise, an Agile organization, how you framed it in the book. So you've got a CEO friend, they call you up, Darrell, they say, hey, we want our organization to go Agile. We're all in on this stuff. What is your approach to help those leaders understand that it's not just something for the teams? It is going to fundamentally change how they lead, how their executive team leads, and it's going to funnel all the way down to keep them out of that rut of simply Agile at scale versus an Agile enterprise. So what is your approach with that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, I'm old enough at this point that I can work with people that I want to work with. I can work on problems that I want to work on. And so when I get a call like that, I really do start off by saying, is this someone I could imagine as a friend? Is this someone that I think I really want to work with and I think I can help? And with a friend, you have to be perfectly honest with them. You not cruel. I don't just mean saying whatever's on your mind, but I do believe in having upfront conversations that say, let's talk about what's really going to be required here and whether you truly believe and think this is something that you could stick to for 3, 4, 5, 10 years. Because if this is just fad of the month, thanks, but no thanks. I don't need this. On the other hand, if you're serious about it, I'd love to train and coach and help you to create this, it's not going to go as fast as you probably think it's going to go, because we're going to take an agile approach to building an agile organization. And that means we're going to start by helping your senior team to understand how this works. And then we're going to run some controlled experiments. And we're going to figure out whether this really helps teams to double or triple their effectiveness. And if it does, then we'll run out more waves, and eventually we'll get to something that we call scaling agile, where we're doing agile in more parts of the organization and on bigger programs. But to tell you the truth, I've had conversations with 3 very impressive organizations in the past month that are all running thousands of agile teams. And they say, yes, we've got lots and lots of agile teams. We do not yet have an agile business. And so we're going to have to get to that third stage of actually creating an agile organization, an agile enterprise. And let me tell you what that looks like. But we're going to test and learn along the way. I would rather have you set up 10 teams that work really, really effectively than 100 teams that don't change anything. And then everybody says, oh, yeah, we tried Agile, didn't do a thing. It ended up on the junk heap of all other management fads. So, let's do it right. To me, it's a little like the number of people that set New Year's resolutions every year, and only 12% of them keep them by the end of the year. In fact, there's something called Quitter's Day in about the third week of January that says, we give up. More than half of the people have quit. And if we're going to work with someone, let's turn them into friends and proud promoters of what they're going to do, so that they become part of the Agile community that is doing it themselves personally. I don't just mean their companies. Personally, they're doing it, that the senior team is an agile team and they love it and they're happy to share it with other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find that a lot of times, executive teams, they are a cross-functional team, right? Like they are a team from different areas. You got, marketing and finance and operations and IT and, all HR, all sitting at a table together. And so they are a cross-functional team. So that transition actually isn't the hardest thing. They kind of get the idea of that. Where I think a lot of times teams do struggle, though, is like when you go down kind of in that middle layer of an organization, and it's like, oh, I only work on this little slice of the organization, and I don't really care about everything else over here. That's usually where I find the most resistance. Do you find the same thing, or do you find something different?
I definitely find it at that level that you're talking about. But I also see it at the senior level, to tell you the truth, because more than a team, they're often a group of silo heads. They're experts of their particular functions, but their primary responsibility on the leadership team is to represent their silo, to make sure that they get a fair amount of resources, that they are fairly represented in trade-offs. And so, I'm reminded of the Olympics team, the Olympics basketball team that assembled a great list of all-star players and ended up getting the bronze rather than the gold. They were all great, but they didn't learn to play together as a team. And so I can't tell you how many conversations I have with senior executives who say, can you help us to fix our management meetings and our budgeting and our planning and our review process? Because we're just sitting in meetings all day long. It's a waste of time. And planning and budgeting, this last year's plan, it went kaput by March. Let's be honest about it. So how can we fix the way our team works together? So I'd say both things. Definitely the layer down below, but I think a lot of senior teams could do better at becoming a real team as opposed to just a collection of experts.
Yeah, I think it comes down to where they see their team identity. Is it at the executive level team, or do they see it as within their area that they represent? If I say my team is marketing, but I'm the CMO, like that's different, right? Like I want them to say, no, my number one team is my executive team, right? Like that's the difference. Yeah. So I think if you get them there where they identify to that being that team, you'll alleviate that problem of, yep, I only care about my silo and I need to represent them and fight for that turf and political battles and things like that happen.
Well said. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I liked what I was thinking with this was we've talked a lot about the team, and even articulating in the book the team is the heart of any agile transformation or any agile organization. I feel like we've solved that problem, at least in my experience. We get that, and which is a great thing. But the problem is that's where we stop. Hey, we're agile now because we've got 100 agile teams out there. They're not delivering anything, but hey, we're agile because we have 100 agile teams, and that's where a lot of organizations get stuck in the rut. And if, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Jeff, but I feel like that's the middle and up layer is where we get stuck. Where do we get the buy-in? Yeah. And there was a quote in the book, and I literally laughed out loud when I read it. It was something like, the people who aren't on board with the agile transformation shouldn't lead it. And it was like, yeah, no shit. Like that sounds like a terrible idea. But
often that's what happens though, right?
And that's what I wanted to say. I'm like, I can't believe that they put this line in there just as a no duh line. This was one of the questions that I wanted to ask you. Like there was a reason you put that line in there. The people who are not bought into the change shouldn't lead the change. I suspect it's because that's what you see out in the industry. Am I on base with that, or am I completely off base with that statement?
No, unfortunately, you're correct with that statement far too many times. And it's one of the reasons that, we talked a little bit earlier about Agile being both principles and practices, or mindsets and methods. And I really believe that if Agile is going to work, everybody in the organization needs to accept Agile principles, Agile mindsets, the idea that customers are a priority, that respect for individuals, that diversity is a good thing, that having everybody agree. If you've got 10 people that agree on everything, you only need one of them. You don't want everybody to see things exactly the same. We all represent different communities, and what do those communities, either as customers or employees or as communities, what do they need? The thought that everybody in an organization is capable of contributing innovative ideas, that we want to hear those voices. The people that are closest to customers, that are closest to operations, those are the people that are going to have the best ideas for how to improve them. And so I really do believe that these kinds of principles, if they don't hold true, then the rest of what agile teams do is not going to matter. And it really, really helps to pull diverse people together and start changing their opinions about silos inside an organization. I hear so many stereotypes of, oh, the accountants, the bean counters, or the lawyers,
or
the
just
legal
the
team.
fictional they don't get it. They are the problem.
Exactly. Yeah. And so legal, they're the sales prevention department. We know those folks. Well, when we create agile teams that actually have people from finance and people from legal on them trying to solve problems, it changes those perceptions. People say, look, you're not going to talk about Pat that way in front of me, or you're not going to talk about George that way in front of me. I've worked with them. They're good people. Their heart's in the right place. And it creates much better general managers, because you get exposure to other departments and what their strengths and weaknesses are and how you can build on each other. So I'm just such a believer in agile as a way that humans work effectively as opposed to robots. There's no doubt that what Frederick Taylor did increased efficiency. It just killed souls. It it made people miserable. There was kind of a deal of, we're going to be more efficient. And because we're more efficient, I'm going to pay you more money and you're going to be miserable. But don't worry about it, because when you get off work, you can take that money and buy happiness. And it turns out that's a bad deal. We just spend too much time at work, and happiness is so important to the effectiveness of our work that that's a bad deal. What we really want is people who are excited to be working on the things that they're doing, who feel like they can contribute. And honestly, as you were saying earlier, I'd often take a little bit less money to be able to have a more engaging, rewarding, fulfilling experience. In the end, it turns out you won't have to make that trade-off. But the fact that you are willing to do it tells us a lot about how people want to work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I came across the line in your book, and this was talking about the diversity that you were just going over, I think back to personal experiences in this. It just happened to be the security person, but it was almost like their job was to tell you why you can't do something.
Right.
But as you called out in the book, and I actually heard Conrad's voice, Conrad, another great coach that we work with. But it was, how can we? All right, it's not your job to tell us why we can't do something. It's your job to tell us how we can accomplish something. And then it also, I'll completely butcher the story, and I don't even know if it's entirely accurate, and I don't know where I got it from, but it was something like Winston Churchill during World War II. Whenever he would come up and review the plans with his generals, if they ever very quickly came to alignment, he would say something to the effect of, all right, gentlemen, we've all very quickly come to alignment. We're all at complete consensus. I recommend that we reconvene in 24 hours because we're obviously missing something in this situation. And that was just his way of making sure that there was diversity of thought. And that he also has something really interesting, like he would, I forget what the program was that he had in place, but it was purposely meant there to challenge him, like to make sure that people weren't intimidated by him and the decisions that he was making. But again, I just think it goes back to just interesting ways that we're seeing that diversity is a good thing with our teams. So I really enjoy that perspective. In fact, we were just talking with Ty a few weeks ago as well. So anyway, Jeff, you were going to say something.
Yeah, and it's diversity of thought across the organization. I think that's maybe a thing that I like to think about, because sometimes people think of, racial and ethnical things, and that's great too, but also thought. And I think that's where you really hit into is different experiences and where people are coming from and getting those together. There's some stories, we have another really good friend of ours who's worked with a major oil company, and you put together like 30 experts that have doctorate degrees and master's degrees. And guess what? Like, your lead time to get oil out of the ground goes from like 18 to 24 months to like 6 to 10 weeks. Right. It's amazing what can happen when people work together and you remove all the delays and bureaucracy within an organization. And the power of the cross-functional team is not something to to shake at. It's a pretty powerful thing in aligning people towards a common goal. So I think if you just, I really like how you talked about, putting people in the position to use their strengths, letting them self-select into that, is a much different aspect when somebody tells you have to do something to when you choose to do something. And I go back to stories in my career where I would work at organizations and we'd be going on these death mark waterfall projects, and you were told you need to work on a weekend, or you need to work, 12, 14 hours a day. That's the expectation. But it's something different when you're working and you believe in the product and you want to work, and people have to be like, hey, you should go home because I want to be here. But you're like, no, it gives me energy to be here. Like, I want to do this. Right. That's a different story. And somebody can't make that commitment for you. You have to want it yourself, or it's going to be something that takes away from your emotional bank account instead of add to it. So I think those are all things we want, and people can say they want it, but putting something in place to actually live that is a very different or challenging thing to do. And I think we covered a lot of that today. So I think that's really great. I kind of want to jump into a different topic that if you're okay with it, that we were talking about before we recorded. And
sure.
It was really about the wars that people have, these Agile Wars. And I really liked how you were talking about before we record. I was like, when people you write a book and people are like, oh, I want to criticize the author. And if I could do that, then I win something. And I really loved your approach of like, hey, let's just have a conversation and have some real civil discourse. So I don't know, maybe you could just dive into that a little bit. Like, what are your thoughts on like these agile wars that are kind of going on out there?
Yeah, they make me sad actually, because if you look, there are a whole ton of different ways of doing agile teams. And is it Scrum, or is it Kanban, or is it XP, or is it Crystal? There are there are dozens of ways of doing agile teams, and now we've got at least 10 different major ways of scaling agile, whether they're teams of teams or safe. Or And to tell you the truth, when you study them deeply enough, 90% of what they say is in common, maybe even more.
Yeah.
The differences are minute. And I watch how people confuse organizations with, oh no, well, this is so much better than that. And this is absolutely terrible. And I think it's bad for Agile. I think it's bad for people. And so, one of the most valuable lessons for me in putting this book out is, you sort of put yourself out there when you put things on the line and you're taking
Mhm.
positions on things. And I've had a number of cases where people have written something critical that they've taken out of context from the book in order to make a point that they want to make because it's a point that's important to them or their positioning or their book or their article or something like that. And the natural tendency is to go to war with that person and say, oh, well, they've offended me. Watch what I can do to you. I'll tear apart your last 5 articles. And I've strongly resisted that. And in at least 7, 8, 9 times, have just taken the conversations private and said, I saw your post. Can we just chat about this for a bit? And one on one, when we're talking with people, we get to like each other. We get to see each other's perspectives. I understand more about what they're saying, they understand more about what I'm saying. We learn actually. And I can say with 100% accuracy, all of those conversations have led to friendships, have led to people that we're both better off for having the conversation. We like each other. And to tell you the truth, it didn't take as much time doing that as it would have to have gone to war with them and continued the back and forth of misunderstanding where they leap on something that I said and I leap on something that they said. And so it's been a life lesson to me of how valuable it is to have these conversations that really try to get to know the people and their perspectives. And it's related to the topic that you were talking about earlier of, we all like people who are like us. We hire people who are like us. We promote people who are like, we mentor people who are like us. What a shame, because we don't learn nearly as much as we do from people who have diverse perspectives from us. And so, for me, one of the best parts of this book is being able to have those kinds of conversations with people and emerge from them with greater respect for somebody that I might have disliked and said unkind things about. Actually learn, develop a friendship where we stay in touch now and we exchange ideas with each other to say, I'm getting ready to say this. What do you think about it? And I'm just so much happier with those kinds of conversations as opposed to going to bed at night and thinking about, what I should have said? I could have really put them in their spot if they'd done this. And so I'd love to call a truce to the Agile Wars. I think they have so much in common that we'd all be better off learning from each other.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's that civil discourse and the nuanced conversation is so important for the diversity of thought and to help us get better as a community, right? Like that feedback loop that we're always learning and we're always improving. Um, is just crucial. And when we come at it from a stance of I'm right, you're wrong, and a win-lose kind of stance, it changes the conversation and it puts everybody into defensive modes, and it doesn't lead to productive conversations or productive situations for anyone. It just confuses people for the most part, especially people that maybe don't have the background that these two people that are fighting on Twitter have, and they don't understand the context of where they're coming from, and then they get confused. And they might do something then and trying to listen to one side of the story that might like be totally opposite what both sides are saying, and I see that confusion happening often. So I really, I guess, appreciate that opinion. And that's one of the things that we really enjoy about this podcast is like when we hear something happening like that on Twitter or other places in the community, a lot of times we like to just invite people and be like, hey, let's just have a conversation about that. Like, what did you actually mean when you said this? And usually through conversations, we find out that, hey, we are actually much more aligned than we think we are. So I think that's awesome.
Yeah, it's interesting that the natural instinct, I think, is not to ask a follow-up question of fascinating. Tell me how you see it that way. And those can be really productive discussions. I learned a lot from watching politics and debates that people come away from it only more entrenched in what they believed before, even though they both heard the exact same thing. But I think it hurts the Agile community when we're doing that because most people's response to confusion is inaction. This is so complicated. I could make a big mistake. I won't do anything. As opposed to, this is really important. I've got to get started on it. I'll learn along the way. But I don't know. I have not met anybody in the Agile community that I haven't learned something from after having that kind of a discussion that I think made me a better person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was actually thinking about this again when I flipped open the book. You talked a little bit about flow efficiency inside of there, and then I saw, hey, Daniel Vacante, and we've had Daniel on the podcast. Great dude, love sitting down and talking with him, and that was something that I was introduced to. I done Kanban in the past before, probably poorly, but nonetheless went into some training for professional Scrum with Kanban course, and that really opened my eyes to this flow efficiency. Yuval was our instructor, the course steward with Daniel, but all of that was just about what are we learning from each other, because these wars with each other have not gotten us into a good spot. For number of years, I neglected all of this really cool stuff that Kanban has to offer me just because it was a Coke versus Pepsi discussion, right? And because that was Coke and I'm a Pepsi guy, I don't need none of that Coke garbage. So, but I also think about just in general, we're thinking about Twitter and diversity and trying to engage people in a civil manner. I feel like that's just as applicable inside of our organization to the person who's over on the other side of the cubicle wall. Right. Well, 6 months ago over on the other side of the cubicle wall. But whenever we remove that layer or put any layer in place between a face-to-face conversation, there's always a loss of integrity is not the right word, but granularity or just the nuance of the spoken word is lost inside of that. And all of a sudden it's like, what do you mean you people, or whatever the case may be, right? There's inflection that's lost when it's written down, et cetera. And so I think that's partly a big struggle now that we're so remote with things, but we've got tools to help bridge that gap. But just as you were saying, Darrell, starting from a place of assuming positive intent in another person and seeking curiosity, have a curious mindset of engaging with other people. And when you are engaging with them, assume positive intent. Assume that this person did not wake up in the morning and say, man, how can I screw with Darrell today? I bet this will really push his buttons, right? And I think we'll all just kind of be in a better place if we can have that mindset when we're engaging with other human beings.
Very well said. I couldn't agree more. And that's the problem that we have to overcome when we find organizations that have hundreds or thousands of agile teams, but not a more agile business. You've got operations people and you've got innovation or agile people, and they kind of resent each other. I developed this great new thing and you won't do it. Or what are those guys doing, burning all of the company's cash? I have to work twice as hard to make money so that they can flush it down the toilet over here. And you reminded me of a comment. There was a time when I was working with an agile team trying to help a retailer develop their loyalty program. And the loyalty program involved credit cards, and credit cards involved regulatory approvals. And so we had someone from legal and regulatory that was trying to help. And it was killing us because we'd come up with an idea and a team member would take it over to the legal department and say, "Can we do this?" And they'd say, "Nope." And they'd come back, 2 or 3 weeks later and say, "Nope, can't do it." And we'll say, "Well, why not? Could we do this?" "I don't know. I'll go check." Well, 3 weeks later, they come back, "Nope, can't do that." And finally, we just said, enough of this. Bring them onto the team. Let
Yes.
them help to solve the problem. And suddenly, this person who had been such an obstructionist for months and months was saying, "Well, you couldn't do that, but you could do this. Would
Yeah.
that work?" "Yes, that would work."
Yeah.
It's just such a different way of working.
Yeah, Jeff and I have done that too at other organizations. It's, been legal, it's been security, and you bring them on the team and all of a sudden everyone can start to think like they think and they come up with those ideas, and maybe they don't have to be there forever, but like if that's your number one thing that's getting in your way of getting stuff out the door, remove that dependency. Don't just try to manage that.
Right.
Exactly.
And I think that's a great lesson there. Yeah, one of the things that we like to do when we go into an organization is we sit down with a team, and a lot of times they're like, there's so much stuff going on around us. How do we even like manage this? All these different departments are agile and they don't want to work with us. And it's like, okay, well, let's just look like, where are these dependencies and how frequently do they happen? The things that get in the way of us producing value. And when we look at that, we say, team E over there, like we're constantly waiting long periods of time and it's all the time. Like maybe we need to pull that skill set onto this team, and then let's see what happens. And maybe it's not forever, but it's for a period of time.
Right.
And I think that's, there's not a one size fits all solution. I think, and it changes over time. And so I think just preparing teams to deal with those types of issues and be able to solve their own problems is a really important thing to learn. And I think that copy paste model we were talking about before with Spotify, like that's the thing that people, it's easy, to Jeff's point too, to just say, I'm just going to copy this and paste it here and it's going to just work forever. And it's never going to work forever. It's always going to be changing. And so it's more about learning how to fish and when to adapt your processes and when to adapt your teams. And how do you do this? And what are you thinking about when you do that? That takes time to learn, but it also takes an open mind to be flexible enough to, try to learn.
This is what's fun for me about talking to real practitioners like the two of you. I love that you've had the experience yourself, you get the experience yourself, and yet the primary responsibility is now to share that, give back to the rest of the community, and see if we can get the engagement going. It's a noble mission. I admire it. Well done.
Yeah.
So one last question, because I know we're getting short on time here, but so read through the book, enjoyed the book, a lot of common themes in there. Just talking with Gary Hamel a few weeks ago, common themes with his as well. And I always go back to Steve Denning, the 3 laws from his Age of Agile book, right? The law of the small team, the law of customer delight, and the law of the nexus organization, right? So a lot of those common themes coming out. Where I get a little bit stuck in this, and you even called it out in your book, you're like, who do I want to read this book? The people, my target audience that I want to pick up and read this book and extract value from it are the people that are thinking about going on an agile journey, going through that agile transformation. But Jeff and I are coaches, and we're the ones that are reading this book, and probably many other of the agile books that are put out there. So what are, whether it's Bain, whether it's HBR, but what are they, they again, but what are you doing, I guess, to try to position that more towards the people that are truly leading this decision to go in this direction, versus just a bunch of agile coaches being interested, picking up the book, getting some value from it, but we're the servant leaders in that type of situation, right? We're the ones that are called on after the decision has been made. How do we influence the people that are actually starting that decision to go agile, if you will?
So I would say I deal with three categories of clients. One of those is large corporations who haven't really started doing Agile, but they're intrigued by it and they want to experiment with it and see if it's something for them. The second is large organizations that have been doing Agile for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and going back to an old cigarette commercial, smoking more and enjoying it less, that it's not having the effect that they had originally hoped it would have. And then I also do some work with small to medium sized businesses that are pretty agile right now, but as they grow, they're worried about how do I keep that agility while also learning how to become a scale organization. And the jobs are a little bit different in each of those, I think. Uh, Working with a company that hasn't started doing Agile yet, or maybe has pockets of it, but buried down in technology where nobody knows what's happening, that's an easier assignment because we can get things from the beginning going in the right direction. And we'll very much do this process of let's get your senior management engaged and understanding what this is and owning this so that we can roll it out in the right way. Helping companies that got off on the wrong foot to realize what's going on. And often we find that in those organizations, there are 7, 8 different kinds of agile going on in the organization, different training programs, wars going on, different software systems so that we can't pull things together. That's far more challenging to figure out. Let's get us back to a common mission of what are we trying to accomplish here. And everybody, even though you've got your favorite approach right now, we're going to have to aim for the greater good. We're going to have to do something that is better for the organization, even if it means you have to do some sacrificing. That's a much tougher assignment for me. And the small to medium sized businesses that want to learn how to grow up, those are fun. I love those because they bring so much enthusiasm, but often they're just on the border of chaos. They're really good at doing this experimentation, but at the same time, how do we figure out how to create a structure and a management approach that will make some things stable and predictable and repeatable? So different approaches to different audiences, I would say. But the most important thing is, can we get the entire organization focused on a common goal? Do they really believe that they know what they want to accomplish as an organization, and they think Agile may be a useful way to help them get there? Agile is not the goal. Agile's not the objective. It's just a way to help you achieve what you really want to achieve. So
Yes.
how do we do it in the right way to make that happen?
Exactly. That's great. It's a great problem for all of us to solve or work towards, right? So thanks again, Darrell, for coming on the podcast. At this time, is there anything you want to plug or promote to our listeners?
No, thank you very much. It's been a fun conversation. I enjoy talking to folks like you. Thank you.
All right, thanks.